So 100 years ago, Roger Babson founded our college on the belief that business should be rendered in service of humanity. As a pioneer in 1919, he believed that success was driven by helping others and that a global community could solve the world's biggest problems. Now that brings us to today, our centennial, where we're at Babson, we believe that success is driven by helping others and the power of a global community, which includes advancing the UN global goals. Our next panel is going to be led by Cheryl Kiser. Cheryl is the executive director of the Lewis Institute for Social Change. For those of you who know Cheryl, you know that she is a force of change herself, and those of you who don't, you must get to know her. She's going to lead a panel with 3 renowned alums, Deb Santis, Ramon Mendiola, and John Kluge. I'm also proud to say that each of them are members of the Babson College Board of Trustees. They share a passion for making the world a better place, and in particular, they continue to guide us and remind us here at Babson of our purpose and the importance of the role that we play in society. And for that, we are grateful for their leadership. Please welcome Cheryl, Deb, Ramon, and John.
So thank you, Marla, and I can't be more excited than to have this panel. I feel that you should have been at our breakfast this morning, because when the 4 of us get together, the conversations we have are always around these beautiful goals behind us. And I can't also thank the committee that's put this entire celebration together, because to have the UN global goals as a panel as we go into our next 100 years is really significant. And to have 3 of our board of trustees here who actually live this every day, they do create economic and social value simultaneously. And I use that word simultaneously because while I think corporate social responsibility is great and really good, and I spent most of my career in organizations around corporate social responsibility, in today's world it's not good enough. And if we're going to bring our entrepreneurial leaders into the next century, we have to understand and be able to address and solve complex issues like these global goals behind us. There are 17 of them, and it's pretty much a $13 trillion business opportunity, which is why we're talking about it here at our centennial. So we have 3 people that we're having a conversation with, and it is a conversation. And Deb Santis is the CEO of the Corporation for Supportive Housing, and she's going to be speaking about the UN Global Goals from growing an organization about 30, 35 years old, and really looking at what does it take to solve a really big, big issue. Ramon Mendiola is the CEO of Florida Ice and Farm Company, and he is leading an organization, and this morning told us that at a board meeting he spends 15 minutes on the board content and 45 minutes engaging the board around the work that the company's doing around addressing the UN global goals. It's very strategic to what his global company does. And John Kluge is an entrepreneur, a social activist, a social justice activist, and the founder of the Refugee Investment Network. And we're going to hear from each of them in the perspectives that they sit. So I asked them first to just say, what in your life happened or occurred that brought you to what you're doing today?
Do you want me to start, Cheryl?
Yeah, that would be great.
Sure. But first, let me say just how proud I am to be part of an institution that puts a premium on creating social value. I lead an organization, a national nonprofit that's also a financial institution, and we invest in housing and service solutions across the country for vulnerable populations. So we're very focused on ending homelessness, as well as moving people out of institutions into housing. And for me, I didn't wake up one day and say, you know, my goal in life is to end homelessness. I was always very interested in real estate and housing. At some point, I didn't want my work to be just transactional. And I think the most, the point in my life where it became very clear what my mission would be was when I had an opportunity to sit with a gentleman at an event about 20 years ago, and he shared his life story with me. And at 5 years old, he was taking care of his 2 younger sisters. His mom struggled with substance use. At some point, the children were separated from their mother. They ended up in foster care. He spent 20 years living on the street, and he battled with substance use. And at some point, he connected with an organization that was very focused on housing and services. And he got into housing. And I had met him at the point that he had been in housing for 5 years. But I listened to his story and I realized just how impactful housing can be. And so for me, that was the moment where I gained so much clarity. And I think in my work now leading the organization, I've been trying to lead a transformation that very much aligns with the UN sustainability goals. We're focused on housing, but we're trying to go from focusing on ending homelessness, only thinking about one system, to really moving toward an integrated approach. And I think that's what the UN sustainability goals are about. It's an integrated approach to not just thinking about one system, one sector, one silo, but really the impact of each of those domains upon the other. So the way we look at housing is housing as a platform for improving access to healthcare, improving access to education, creating income. And so that's the alignment and that's the excitement, I think, in really trying to align with the UN goals.
Oh, that's great. And I'm glad that you mentioned the integrated part, because as you look at the goals on the slide, they're not just siloed. They all intersect, and you can't solve one, you can't address one without addressing the others, and so I'm glad that you brought that up. Ramon.
So, good morning, Babson. Hope you're doing just great. Hope everybody wake up after last night. Huh? So, for the last 16 years, I've been running this business, FIFCO, out of Costa Rica, and doing what I love to do the most, which is brewing beer for our consumer base in different countries where we have operations. So our company, we define ourselves as an integrated beverage company. Everything that has a liquid is core for us. So we have partnership with Heineken, with PepsiCo and soft drinks, and Diageo and spirits. And at one point back in 2008, we were overheating the machine a little bit, selling too much beer to our consumers, growing double-digit growth for 3 consecutive years. But I think we overheated the machine a little bit in terms of how our consumers were enjoying our product. So that called us to a reflection inside our organization, and together, along with my team, who had been blessed with them, because everything that I would like to share has been part of that journey that we've been building together. So we decided to do, I think, one of the most important decisions we have ever done in our 100-year history of our company. That was back in 2008 when we decided to merge our business strategy with our corporate social responsibility, thus becoming what we describe as a triple bottom line, taking care of people, planet, profit simultaneously. So basically, with the same rigorosity that we were taking care of our financial performance, we did the same thing for our social and social dimensions. And to accomplish that goal, we really put a comprehensive, systematic dialogue with our stakeholders. And we interview everybody in our society, those who regulate us, NGOs, business partners, suppliers, consumers, employees, shareholders. And basically they told us, and we asked them, what do you expect from us as a responsible company? And basically they told us 4 things. Number 1, by far our biggest social footprint was the misuse of alcohol. Second was the waste because of the packaging materials that we were putting out there in the market. Number 3, the water that we were using in our products, and the carbon emissions because of the infrastructure that we had. And but then, we needed to do something about it, because when we got that feedback from our society, it was very clear for us that we needed to change the way we're doing business in a more holistic way. And thereafter, we then put very bold ideas and objectives once we were able to get the buy-in from our organization. And we decided to change the consumption patterns of how consumers were enjoying our products. And believe me, changing consumption patterns, how we drink alcohol, it's a big task. You know, we wanted to put less drinks per occasion and more spread out through the week. Changing consumption patterns on alcohol is a big task. It takes even a generation, even especially on Babson alumni. You know, we need to improve that. I'm working on some of my friends to do so, though. But the very important thing is that we work tremendously with NGOs who help us improve that consumption patterns. Secondly, we then decided to do bold ideas. We declare our company that, this is back in 2008, that we'll become a zero solid waste company by 2011, water neutral company by 2012, and a carbon neutral company by 2017. And we accomplished all of those along the way. But very importantly, in order for us to accomplish that, we needed to change the way we were remunerating our executives and leaders, not only economic KPIs, but also we integrated now with the social and environmental KPIs. Everything can be measured, and that's why we were able to drive all these objectives in this period of years. And the last thing that we did was to report back to society and the progress that we were making along the way. And by doing that, you know, we really transformed the way we were doing business. And especially when you touch the wall of your executives, and your executives now need to think not only in financial terms, but also in social and environmental terms, you see the organization really advancing. And the second most important decision I think we made was when we discovered in 2014 the higher purpose of the organization. And you know, many times in our organization, we spend a lot of time in mission and vision statements. But you know what? Our learning was that those mission and vision statements, that hits very well to the executives in their minds. But if you really do well the purpose, the reason why we're here, why every employee comes to work every day, you really connect them with the heart of the employee. And I sincerely believe if we are capable of winning the hearts of our employees, we will have their minds forever.
Great, thank you very much. And John?
I'll try and be brief. For me, the moment really was when I was coming out of college. When I was born, my dad was 68 years old. So I only knew him as someone who was older, but it wasn't really something I thought about consciously as a kid until just after college. And he'd fallen out of bed, he broke his hip. He was 89 at the time. And this was the first moment that I realized that his time and our time together was finite. So began this journey of inquiry together. And he was much more reflective. And I asked him, you know, as someone who has been in business for decades and been in and out of 200 different enterprises, what is it that you would have done differently if there was anything? And he thought about it and he said, well, I would have changed my thinking about having one pocket or two pockets. It's like, what do you mean by that? He said, well, for most of his life, he had been focused on generating economic value. And then using his other pocket of revenues generated and resources to then do things for the world, try and make things a little bit better. And he was a kid who came to America at 8 years old with the clothes on his back, and that was it. And then one day, someone took a chance on him, and he wanted to repay that sort of debt. And I think for him, the easiest imagination, a way to imagine what a one-pocket thinking would be, where you are living and working to make the world better with the things that you do in your life, was medicine. Because he was pretty old school that way. Doctors, in some ways, are a kind of a social entrepreneur. The business of medicine is to help and improve human life. And that was where I was thinking, okay, well, if I'm going to try and take that piece of wisdom, how do I reinforce that in my own life? And the question and the search for the last 10 years for me was about how do you become most effective at making a difference? And that's how I ended up coming to Babson and learning about the powers of entrepreneurship. And it was really my wife, who's a professor at the University of Virginia, and her research around migration and displacement that has put me in the place I am now. So I have her to thank or to blame in terms of focusing on migration. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, there is no goal for displacement or migration. But it is something that is woven through everything. If you care about gender equity, if you care about reducing inequalities around the world, alleviating poverty, if you care about climate change, which I think all of us have to, then addressing migration is one of the fundamental challenges of our time. So how then do you marshal resources to do that? We think about this as the immigrant alpha at the Refugee Investment Network. Both my parents were immigrants. My mom actually was a refugee from Iraq. But if you look at the rates of entrepreneurship as a percentage of population, refugees have the highest rates of entrepreneurship. It's by necessity. You think about the fact that the Fortune 500 companies, 44% of those companies were founded by immigrants or displaced people or their children. That's not a coincidence. Not a coincidence that in 17 different industries, companies that have 20% of their workforce as refugees or displaced people have higher retention rates, which improves cash flows, which improves performance for the company and the investors. This is altogether a thesis that we think is worthwhile pursuing and using as a lens in how we approach business and economic development.
Great, thank you. So could each of you give us a concrete example of the impact that you're making? And we heard the power of story this morning. So we'd love to hear a story that really shares what you're doing. And you all come from very different perspectives in terms of where those stories would be. And so I'd love to just hear from you, either whoever wants to start first, but I'd love to just hear the story of impact.
Yeah, I'll start.
Sure.
Almost 10 years ago, we set out to make the business case for supportive housing for the healthcare field. We, I think, were one of the first organizations that was talking about housing as a social determinant of health. And we would go out and we would meet with hospitals and managed care organizations and have this conversation about how housing and services could really help a healthcare organization or a hospital keep people from cycling back through the system and also could improve health outcomes for a very vulnerable or frail population. And it was frustrating work because we didn't get a lot of receptivity from the healthcare field. So, fast forward, and now you hear social housing as a social determinant of health all the time. You talk to physicians in a hospital, and many of them will tell you that if I could write a prescription for housing for people I'm seeing in the emergency room, I would do that because that would be the best pill that I could provide. So, it's been a long haul, but it's been very gratifying because I can see the impact now. The American Medical Association now put out a paper that said that supportive housing has an impact on people's lives, and hospitals need to be part of creating supportive housing opportunities. So, I mentioned earlier, I think the importance of the UN goals and really being integrated. And so I think for me, it's exciting that I can actually see the impact of the work that we have led through our thought leadership and now see that other sectors like hospitals and healthcares are embracing housing as an opportunity to improve the lives of the people that they're also serving.
Yeah, and I love the notion of housing as a platform because people always think of homelessness and housing as just a real siloed solution, but it really is an integrated solution, so I love that. Thank you. Ramon.
So we've done many initiatives since way back in 2008 addressing our social and environmental footprints that I was describing. But one in particularly that I really changed my life, touched my heart, and is the one that I feel most proud of, is back in 2014 we were doing this sharing the purpose with our all employees, and we did many meetings, but the last one was the most important one with over 3,500 employees in one site. And we were sharing the purpose and what does it mean to each of us. And I opened up the conversation with our employees in a different way with them. And one employee approached us and he said, you know, Ramon, I'm very proud of working in this company. I see your commitments on social initiatives and environmental initiatives. But you know, there are people in this company which are poor. And I'm one of them. And I would like to think, what's your thoughts on that, on those are? And I was shocked. And I grabbed the microphone and I said to him, listen, first and most, I'm so sorry to hear about your personal situation. And to be quite honest, I don't know how many of you out there in this big crowd are living on the same considerations. Not because the company pay bad salaries, we pay very good salaries, very competitive, but what we learned, so long story short, I said to them, listen, I would promise that I will come back with something to address this. So I gathered my team, and in 4 weeks, we put together a plan. We hired social workers to understand where those people could be within our organization. And once we got and obtained the results, you know, Costa Rica is a country that we have 20% of our population living under poverty conditions. I'm sure we're not proud of that. And within our organization, we have 3.6% of our entire population living under poverty conditions after we gathered all this information. And we put a comprehensive program to address this issue. And we invite these employees to work together along with the company. We were actually designing a program to teach them how to fish, catch the fish, but not serve the fish on the table. And we developed a 360 program addressing housing issues, health issues, more importantly, addressing them on supporting on the financial, how to manage the finances. And we put through our BTO program, volunteer time out, we put executives as a mentor to each of these individual families. And then I realized, because we became very experts on this, that it takes, according to the United Nations, 10 years to lift somebody out of poverty conditions. And you know what, when I saw those statistics and information, I said, I don't have 10 years. We'll commit ourselves, and then went public, and I said, in 3 years, we'll lift every single individual that we have within our organization out of this condition. And 3 years went by, and I'm very pleased and proud to say that last year we lifted 100% of our employees living on that vulnerability condition. You have no idea the impact, of course, on those 3.6% of our entire population, but to the remaining 97% that saw the organization really addressing this, and we call it FIFCO opportunities. We don't want anybody to be tagged on that we're poor, we have this situation. Of course, along the way, we learned a lot of things, but people needed to explain their personal situations. We ended up, you know, having a lot of deep, in-depth conversation with the families, because as you can imagine, we have all kinds of problems within our personal lives. But they are a proud organization now, you know, these people, and now we're expanding this program to the other geographies that we have. So this really addresses the United Nations goal number 1. And I think if we wait for the government to do this for us, it will never happen. It has to start with us, every single organization, one at a time, and we'll make a big difference.
Thank you. John.
You know, there's so many different stories of just the most inspiring entrepreneurs. Displaced people are like the Navy SEALs of entrepreneurship, really are. You talk about people who have been through hell and then rebuilt and who become living examples of contribution. It's astounding. There's a woman in New Jersey, her name is Adina Bayo. She spent the first 13 years of her life in a refugee camp in Sierra Leone. She was originally from Liberia. Not too dissimilar in some ways to one of our fellow board members, Rich Dennis, who went on to found Sundial Brands, although you know, he had a different displacement situation. But Adina, she got lucky. She got resettled to the US, and she got a chance to study in college. She went into finance. She started saving. but her dream was to be an entrepreneur. And her parents and her grandmother were in the food business back home in Liberia. And so she wanted to start a franchise. She really liked pancakes, so IHOP was her franchise of choice. She had a little bit of savings, but not enough to start the business. And she went to her first bank to ask for a small business loan. She had actually established pretty good credit through her time in college, but they turned her down. So she went to a second bank. They turned her down. A third bank. They turned her down. The problem was not what was on paper for the loan officers. It was the person that they were looking at, and it was a person that they were. Most of the power and capital happens to be in the hands of typically older white males. And the biases that were at play, because she was now an African-American woman, that she was a woman, that she was displaced, triggered all of these alarm bells about risk. Now, eventually, someone did take a bet on her. 7 banks later, she happened to become the fastest growing IHOP franchise in the Eastern Seaboard in their history, as the youngest entrepreneur in their history. She now owns 3. She also has a real estate portfolio of $250 million in assets, and is the second largest employer in her city of 50,000 people. But I think what's remarkable is that she's not remarkable, not in a unicorn sense. There are thousands and thousands of people like her who are just waiting for someone to take a chance on them, but are kept out of formally participating and contributing to their economies because of really foolish and short-sighted policies. So one of the things that I'm really happy about is one of the first things that we did was a partnership with the crowdfunding platform Kiva. And Kiva raises money, for those of you who don't know, from the public crowd. They invest in micro-entrepreneurs through partnerships with microfinance institutions. And they provide those loans at 0%. That's, they're structured as a nonprofit. But 4 years ago, if you went to a microfinance institution, almost anywhere in the world, and you said, "Are you lending to refugee entrepreneurs?" everyone would say, "No way. There's a flight risk. We don't trust those people. They're not from here. Why would I invest in supporting someone's company if they're likely to go home?" Well, the truth is today, the average time someone's displaced is 17 to 26 years. And if you are displaced that long, and the odds of you actually being resettled or going home are less than 1%. Everybody else is stuck somewhere in the middle. So you're there to stay. The problem is these institutions didn't want to take that risk because of a perceived risk. So we partnered with Kiva. We helped them raise some sort of 0% interest capital, which was sort of like an R&D fund, and they distributed it to 6 different microfinance institutions in 6 countries. 8,000 entrepreneurs later, we now have data that proves that refugees are in fact better lending customers on average than a typical client. Those microfinance institutions are scaling their services to those clients now because they saw them as a viable customer pool where 4 years ago they didn't. And they're using commercial capital to do that. Because of the success of that experience and partnership, Kiva is now setting up their first for-profit investment fund called KRIF, or the Kiva Refugee Investment Fund, which will be a $30 million deal across different regions around the world. And they're providing a return to accredited investors for the first time in their history. So not only were we able to help influence these other institutions, but we were able to shift this organization's thinking about how they actually structure their products, and now they can serve an entirely new population group. That's exciting to me because that's literally changing the way a system operates, and we have to do that now in every single country where there are displaced people at every layer of the economy. So it's a start.
That's a great, great story. All of them are great stories, and I'm looking at the clock, and what would be wouldn't be an entrepreneurial conference if we weren't pivoting. So I hope you're okay. These are my friends. We have lots of conversations. So I'm going to ask you, instead of the last question you prepared, at Babson, we really want 100% of our students to have 100% literacy on the UN Global Goals, not because it is sort of the right thing to do, it is the better thing to do. It is a better thing to do for opportunities and not just risk mitigation, opportunities. And I'd love to ask the panelists to end with, what can you say to us and share your sense of urgency, because you've used the word urgency. There is a sense of urgency. Those 17 goals are critical for all of us to have healthy businesses, because if we don't have a healthy society, we're never going to be able to grow healthy businesses. So just one word of advice around the notion of opportunity and not trade-offs in addressing these UN global goals.
I think the lesson from the goals is the importance of creating that larger ecosystem. And I think to the extent that we're participating in that larger system, the rewards are larger. And so for any organization, whether a nonprofit or a business entity or even government, I think if you're interested in creating greater impact, I think one of the best ways to do that is to expand the ecosystem in which you work. And I think that's what Babson prepares us for.
Yeah, great, thank you.
I think at least the way I look at it, and for me a special message for this audience is that certainly we need to evolve in the way we have defined capitalism, a way just to maximize shareholder value. I think that concept is completely obsolete. And we need to evolve in that thinking to what I describe as a holistic capitalism, one that we are able to share the wealth or the value that we create in a better way with all our stakeholders and not just the shareholder. Shareholder would always be very important, but it's not necessarily the only one. And I believe why we need to do this, because we're living in a society that is not quite failed yet, but we have so many issues. Hunger, poverty, malnutrition, climate changes, issues that we're confronting. And certainly our governments don't have all the answers nor the resources to deal with that. And I think the private sector, more than just generating employment and paying taxes, which is normally the answer I get from business people, we need to step up. We need to really at least start taking care of all the social and footprints that we create internally, first from the house outwards. And I think Babson for me, because all starts with a good education. And that's why my dream is that Babson will continue embracing all these principles to be able to pass on this knowledge and wealth of knowledge to all our students, especially I have my 2 kids here now, so I want them to embrace these principles so that when they go out and incorporate it within our organizations, they are a force of change, not only for our organizations, but also for society. And that's the only way that we will evolve as a society.
Thank you.
I
Sharon?
totally agree. I would just encourage you not to think with 2 pockets, but to think with 1. All of your resources and assets. If you are thinking entrepreneurially, what do I have, who do I know, and what do I know? So think about all of your resources and how they can be mobilized, because these challenges are so big, but they are also very solvable if we do that work.
I love my panel. I absolutely love my panel. So we couldn't have a better example of entrepreneurial leaders. We have an entrepreneurial leader, both of them inside, one who has grown a social enterprise. We have an entrepreneurial leader on the inside whose journey is to transform and create new business models from a huge corporate platform. And we have an entrepreneur. And if I could hope for the future for Babson, is that when we talk about entrepreneurship everywhere and of all kinds, this is what we're talking about. And President Spinelli, in one of his first talks to the staff and faculty around strategy, said the world needs Babson now more than ever. And I couldn't agree more, because the problems of our future are not complicated. They are complex, and it requires a very different way of thinking, of seeing, and of talking. And I think Babson prepares people to do that. And I thank you all for being here, and thank you for what you do.